to just encourage people to really look at these details that we're talking about very critically and remember that government agencies are not our friends. There's so many weird coincidences. All of the astronauts that landed on the moon were all Freemasons. NASA and numerology adds up to 666. You know, all of these things that we see.
NASA in Hebrew is to deceive.
It's endless. There's so many, and I really think that they're just absolutely laughing in our faces that we believe this stuff.
What's going on, y'all? This podcast is brought to you by Modern Roots Life. Modern Roots Life is a Christian-owned and operated company, and it's bringing real health back to its roots. They offer powerful, all-natural health supplements such as beef liver, cod liver oil, beef tallow, magnesium, and mineral-rich salts, all sourced the way God intended. Clean, simple, and from the earth. So whether you're looking to boost your energy, restore mineral balance, or just fuel your family with real nourishment, Modern Roots Life has got you covered. Guys, in this community, we're trying to get healthy in our mind, in our body, and our spirit. So don't neglect your health. If you want more information, check out modernrootslife.com and check the link in my description. You know, people often ask me how they can support me. Well, I think it's pretty cool if you can support me by supporting the people who support me, and you get something in return. And being healthy is a pretty good return.
All right, my friends, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of the Ben Wehrman podcast. It has been a long time since I've recorded an episode, and we will get into why. There's been a lot of crazy stuff going on, but today we have my good friend JT Follows JC, who we've been in touch for quite a while through the socials, going through all sorts of the same rabbit holes. So I thought it would just be fun to bring you on here and just chat about all sorts of stuff. So JT, thank you for coming, man.
Yeah, sure, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I've seen all the stuff you've been sharing on X, and I love it. I love this. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like that we're on the same wavelength as far as like you're talking about the Artemis stuff, you're talking about old world, little season stuff, and so yeah, that's kind of my bag lately.
Yeah, and for listeners, I posted this a few times on the socials, but I took several months off from recording episodes, and one of the reasons why, the main reason why I would say, is because the last 5 episodes I did were all about flat Earth. And to me, when I went down that rabbit hole and realized I was wrong about such a fundamental thing, I sort of decided to just step away for a little while and just go into deep researching mode. And what are these other foundational things I was wrong about? And just really go into the deep dive state. Because as I was mentioning before we started recording, was I usually use this podcast as a place to bring people on things I'm pretty confident about and help guide my listeners to the directions that I feel like they should be going. And, you know, everyone has a different style in their podcast. Some people are going into subjects that they have no clue about and asking questions. That hasn't really been me for the most part. Most of my episodes are like biased toward what I believe if people listen. But I think it's time to just open that up and there's so many huge questions that are out there that are so far beyond what I know and what some of us may ever know. So I just need to be more comfortable with bringing people on to talk about stuff that I'm clueless about, and we can all learn together. So I just think you'd be awesome for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most of the things I talk about on my podcast are things that, will we ever really know for sure? I mean, so when you start talking about biblical cosmology or just the cosmos in general, because you have to put your faith in certain places because there's so many gaps in what we know and what we think we know. And then same thing goes for like ancient research. If you talk about like megaliths, it's like everybody's got their theories on the pyramids and the giant megaliths around the world. But does anybody really know? I mean, some people claim they know like how they were built and who built them. But again, you have to trust them. You have to trust these sources. So then you get into another topic of like the old world, like hidden history, the Dark Ages, Tartaria, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, like, of course, if you go ask ChatGPT or you go Google something, of course, it's going to give you an answer. But I mean, we don't trust Google or ChatGPT. So it leads us to do lots of research into old books and I have to bounce ideas around each other because, you know, I think a lot of us, especially this research I find fun because you do get to talk to a lot of people and a lot of different perspectives. And I do feel like that a lot of us have parts of the puzzle, and then nobody's got it completely fit together. But I think I've got a framework that makes sense to me, and that's about the best I've got right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just think that the ultimate goal right now should be to bring as many bright minds into these interesting topics as we can to increase that pool of people thinking and researching and throwing our ideas around. Because I believe, as I'm sure you do as well, that humanity, we have this gift of when we all angle our energy toward a goal together, we can figure stuff out in a really powerful way. So we have tools like social media right now where we get to, you and I both have decent platforms on different places. I think your biggest one is Instagram. Mine is X and Noster.
Yeah, I mean, I've Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. I'm pretty big on. I've got a pretty decent sized YouTube channel, but yeah, like X. It's funny, like you connect on X. Like I'm trying to grow on X, and X is like it's the nut that I haven't cracked yet, but I'm working on it. But of course,
Yeah.
it's like you can't. I'm only one guy, so like trying to do it all by myself is,
Yeah.
you got to put your energy some places, and obviously that's typically where you get the reward,
Yeah.
or they get the return.
And we all get to see that as more of this content gets out there, more people are talking about it. I've learned so much just from following more people and putting stuff out there and reading the comments. It's awesome. But anyway, all that aside, to start things off with you, sir, I always ask this question because I don't think I've ever heard you just tell your full story about how you got into this game. I would say, just how do you describe what brought you into this whole truth-seeking, internet sleuthing stuff? Where'd you come from?
I have a pretty traditional background in, like, I grew up as in like kind of a Protestant church, non-denominational church. My family always took me to church. I went to Christian schools from like 7th grade all the way through college. And I've lived kind of the quote unquote American dream type life. Like I went through all that kind of stuff, got married, had kids, bought a house in the right part of town and all that kind of stuff. And then 2020 happens and 2021 happens. And at that age, I was probably about 40, about 40 years old. So I was already kind of getting a little disillusioned with a lot of the things that I was taught. But for the most part, things in my life were going pretty well. So I was aware of conspiracies, but I guess I didn't really want to know about conspiracies then. Like I had my brother, he would always hit me up talking about stuff and saying that the elites are all Satanists and things like that. And I was just like, no, that couldn't be. And then he would say some stuff and he'd have some proof. And I'd be like, I don't know. But yeah, like, I don't know. And I would because like a lot of people, like a lot of normies, like you just don't want to know. If everything's going well in your life, like, why would you even want to know that? That's going to bum me out. That's going to make me scared. Like, why do I want to know that? But then when 2020 happens and so you have, COVID, then you have the election and both those things, I was on X a lot then. And this, I guess, is way before me doing anything on social media. I was more kind of like a lurker on X, and I was more like a responder to threads, but I wasn't posting anything. But I was following all the news and I was paying close attention to the pandemic and I was paying close attention to the election. And at one point, we get into 2021 and I was just like, I don't think anybody even cares what's true anymore. And I started to have like a crisis, like a sort of a midlife crisis, like things going on in my life at the same time that really kind of broke me down big time. And I was just, I really had to seek God during that time. And so at that point, I was a believer, and I would say that I've been a believer in Christ my whole life, but I really never leaned into that. I never really understood what it meant to really, to really follow and kind of walk the walk. And I think it was at that point I just thought, well, I believe that Jesus is real. I believe the Bible's true. And I started to read that again. And then everything outside of that, I decided I needed to question. And so now I started to read my Bible with the intent to not try to read into the Bible what I've been taught, but more examine what I've been taught versus what it says. And then, kind of through that, if you think, oh, well, if they lied about 2020, what other years have they lied to us? And then you go down that rabbit hole and you find out it's like pulling the thread of a sweater. And so at that point, I think I started to learn a lot of stuff. So I was going kind of deep down the conspiracy rabbit hole. At the same time, I was really just awakened to everything. And I was willing to accept that what my brother said was probably true. And so when I started to accept that, I started to learn a lot. And I don't know, I was definitely one of those kind of Christians where I thought like, oh, this is the end times. So I sort of felt like this is my last chance to really start talking about some of the things that I believe. And so that kind of gave me like the push to like eventually start a TikTok channel, start talking about the conspiracies and kind of framing it with a biblical lens. So that basically happened like end of 2021. And, I went from TikTok, then eventually I started a podcast. I actually even made a movie with my buddy called Ancient Angels. We did this documentary about giants and angels and megaliths and stuff like that. And
Is that Demon
yeah,
Erasers,
it's been really
Brian?
cool. It's been really fun because what I believed back then, even like going back to like 2022 to today, I've learned so much more. So I've been, again, we talked earlier about kind of being like on a truth journey and acknowledging that I don't have it all figured out. And as I learn and as I'm presented with better information, I've changed my mind about a lot of things. But, the core principles of, we've been lied to and I want to find out what's true, that's remained the same.
Yeah. And the thing that I find so interesting, and this is one of the main differences between us, I would say, is that you, as you said there, your North Star that you knew was true this whole time was Jesus and Christianity. That was your rock. And you kind of worked from that. And for me, it's totally different. I was raised with no religious leanings at all, pretty much agnostic leaning atheist, I would say, for pretty much my whole life. And for me, the flat earth rabbit hole, for anyone who watched the series I made on that was what really got me thinking about much bigger questions. Like I would say up until last year, I didn't even I was a full evolution believer. We're on a globe. All that stuff was real until going down that rabbit hole. And that opened up all sorts of new doors of, oh crap, this is like, we are in a created world. There's no way that the sun and moon are rotating over us in perfect fashion. Sun tells us time of day, moon tells time of month, stars tell us the year. Are you kidding me? This is like a clock. It's a perfect clock. This is not some randomly combusting universe full of gas balls everywhere to make that. So to me, that was like, okay, I am sure at this point that there was a creator. That was one of the biggest realizations I made last year, and I've locked that in. But to me, and this is one of the reasons why I brought you on specifically, as your name has JT follows JC, you're a very staunch Christian. To me, there's a gap between there is a creator and a God and the more specific like religious affiliations like Christianity, like Jesus Christ and all of that. So how would you help me bridge the gap between, okay, there's a creator and here's a more specific story of Jesus and all these things, how that fits into the story? I know that's a huge question, but we bring people on here to challenge them.
No, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, because that's a lot of people say that there's 1,000 gods. Like, I've heard there's that meme with there's an atheist saying like there's 1,000 gods. So how do I know which one's real? It's the one you hate. It's the one you're really trying to reject and you don't want to be accountable to. I mean, that's the kind of thing like what like famous agnostic atheists like Richard Dawkins will try to push back against this idea of a creator, but then eventually he does start to float the idea of like this panspermia where we've been seeded by these aliens from outer space and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, so now you're, well, it does kind of get close to that where, yeah, like if this is the idea of like the Anunnaki, what the ancient Sumerians believed which I would say they believed they were gods. They never said that they were aliens. They never said they came from Nibiru. That's like a false translation from like Zachariah Stitchin. But that being said, some people don't want to be held accountable to a creator. So therefore they'll make up any kind of crazy idea to be able to ignore that kind of pull at like that. If there is a creator, then there's rules and laws that are above us. And then there is truth. And the truth does not come from us and it doesn't come from me. We have to be bound by the truth. And so like in today's day, everybody's got their truth. Well, that's your truth and this is my truth. But it's like, but if truth is a actual thing, then we can't mold the truth to what we want it to be. We have to bend to what the truth is. The truth is solid, the truth is real, and we have to adapt to the truth instead of what they do today is try to bend the truth around anything that's comfortable for me. So yeah, I mean, obviously I do have a bias. I mean, I'll be honest. And I think the truth is you do kind of have to eventually, like I said, in all these kind of subjects there's mystery to it. It involves some kind of faith. So I would say that I believe there's a lot of evidence to back up what I believe, but I would be a liar if I didn't say that it involved faith. I mean, that's literally what it means to be a Christian, is you have to put your faith in this invisible God and the promises that he's given us. Now, I think it's interesting when you do consider like a macro view of history, at least the history we're taught and the history that I've researched that does ring true to me. Like the Bible is the most accurate manuscript about things that we're predicting things in the future. And so like that's really how God establishes his word is to be true, is that you predict something and it comes true one day. And so if you really think about the story of Christianity, that you have this story that goes from Moses, eventually you get down to the prophets, and then you get to the prophecies about this Messiah to come. Jesus shows up at this very specific time. And then when he comes, like the whole world changes after that. And I don't think that's debatable at all. Even if you think about like when we talk about this, we can probably get into the little season more. Just the idea that there was once a kind of a chronology and a timeline, and eventually it gets changed to be AD and BC. The real question is like, why did they need to change the timeline? But it's all wrapped around this one figure, Jesus Christ, is Anno Domini is the year of our Lord. And so if you think about like that everything did change, and kind of the whole Western world was Christian. I mean, it doesn't mean everybody was a Christian, but like these nations that did all the things that have shaped the world the way they are now were Christian nations. And so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I think that just the way I can kind of show people, and what I like to do in my videos is, especially when I first started making content about, that idea that the world's run by satanic pizza files. It's like, okay, so you do have that kind of dichotomy, and you see like how they move. And it's like, I can't prove to you that Jesus is who he said he was. I can show you evidence if you're willing to listen to it, but I can make a very, very good case that these people worship the opposite of him. And you see by their actions, you see by their fruit. And ultimately, I just think that even just the basic ethos of Christianity is that I'm going to deny myself and I'm going to put others in front of myself. And if you think of a God who's good, I mean, like that message is the right way, right? Because if everybody chooses themselves, you kind of get the world that we've got right now. You got a lot of selfish, narcissistic people focusing on themselves and mistreating the poor and the less fortunate and taking advantage of people based on strength and their own power. So if God is good and he established a way through Christ, and the way that we know love, what the Bible says is that Christ died for us. So he laid down his life for us. So that's love, is putting, the creator of everything dies for his creation. And that's the opposite of basically everything else, because we'd be expected to die for the king, but he died for us. And so if that's our example, I think it's the right way. Like, so if one day I'm wrong, I'll live my life in the right way, regardless of like, however anybody thinks in the end. It's like, I'll put you in front of me. Well, how am I wrong by doing that?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned a little season. We mentioned that a couple of times. That's on my list. We'll definitely dive into that super hard in a second here. But regarding so earlier we talked about how there's some faith involved in a lot of the stuff we do inherently. Specifically, you and I are both looking into history a lot. You said, we look at these pyramids and all these ancient structures and these cathedrals, and we just wonder, how the heck did they make this? This doesn't make any sense. Why are there gigantic doors to get into these places? Did we really just make these things as humans? We can't even open these things. How did these giant rock structures in Peru get made that are just like enormous rocks that don't look like they would fit together? There's so many mind-boggling things we see, but we start with those physical things that we can see and touch, and then we try to fill in the gaps to get there in the work that we do. Now, for me, the difficulty I have with things in religion and Christianity as well is, like, what physical thing, I guess my question is this: what are those physical like things you can point to and see to have sort of as starting points that are the most convincing to you as evidence. I know you talked about Josephus is a famous historian who did a lot of the writing about this stuff, but part of my difficulty is that there's so much man-made manipulation that we know happens over history that it's hard for me to grab onto anything. I need some sort of foothold. So what do you think are the most convincing footholds through history that tell you that the entire story of Jesus and Christianity is the truth?
Well, of course, if you think about the three major religions in the world, it's Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, right? Well, Islam is historically wasn't a thing until like 600 years after the times of Jesus. Well, that's what we're told anyways. Judaism, on the other hand, you think about it, it's like it is, well, what they say that they believe, even though we can question what they believe. You know, they believe in what they call the Torah, the Tanakh, and they believe in all these books that came before. And so obviously the books of the Bible written by Hebrews, not necessarily Jews, they were written by Hebrew people, and they were all prophesying about the same thing. And I think it's really interesting, and this is what I'd question to anybody who does follow, I guess, the Torah, and they don't follow, you know, the New Testament of Christ, is that when Jesus shows up based on these Daniel prophecies, he does show up when he's supposed to. Like there's a specific amount of time based on the 70-week prophecy that's basically 70 weeks would be set, each being 7 years. So it's like a 490-year prophecy. Jesus shows up right then. And Jesus prophesies about the destruction of the Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And that happens. So like that's the thing that's interesting. Like Protestant churches don't really talk about that too much. And I think for the little season, I think it's super important, because regardless if you believe we're in little season or not, I mean, Jesus made this prophecy that was mind-blowing at the time, that Jerusalem was going to be burned to the ground. The temple would have no stone left upon another. And that literally happened. So if you think about it from like that perspective, that you have this small sect of Judaism that turns into to Christianity, and they start following the way, they start following this Messiah, who, again, that there's accounts that up to 500 people saw Jesus resurrected. So Jesus makes this prophecy and it comes to pass. So if you think about, even from the way of somebody who's still waiting for the Mashiach or the Messiah to come, well, if the Jews at the time rightfully rejected a false prophet, a false Messiah, well, then isn't it pretty interesting that the God that they believed in did send the Romans to destroy their city and wipe out the whole old covenant system? So like the Levitical priest line got wiped out. All the records for who was, you know, of those 12 tribes were kept in the temple, and their temple system got wiped out at the same time. So, you know what I'm saying? Like if they believe in that God who's real, would he not commend them for rejecting a false prophet? Instead, he did exactly what Jesus said they would do. They would send the Romans and they would burn the city down. And then so this small sect grows, as the Daniel prophecies talk about, that this kingdom will grow into this mountain that covers the whole earth. That happened. So if you think everybody's wrong, and I know some people get into the idea that Rome manipulated things like that, but Rome converting to Christianity, like, why did they ever do that? Like, what was the need for them to do that? If they were the power structure and they worshiped this pantheon of gods with Jupiter or Zeus being the head of this pantheon, how did they ever get to the point where they outlawed it and made it illegal to practice paganism? I mean, I think it speaks to that they believed. And I mean, so these things were all prophesied to happen, and they did happen. So now we're like kind of living in a world where over the last couple hundred years, the nations have been moving away from that. But again, that might lead us to believe that, yeah, we are in that little season, because it says that Satan, after this 1,000 years of Christ, that eventually he deceives the nations and they start to reject God again.
Yeah. And to me, the Bible is just such a fascinating, interesting thing. And I still haven't read it yet. I really need to do that. That's at the top of the list. I know it's going to be a beast to get through, but it has so many of the answers. And through so many of the different rabbit holes I've gone through, I find content creators who bring up scripture and show how it ties to these things that I'm learning about. And I can say for sure that it's more truthful than any of the science or history textbooks I've read. It has a lot more truth in there on those things. So it's definitely even if you're taking the hater's perspective of, oh, Christianity is a huge psyop and it's all wrong, then you'd have to say like it was still written by somebody that knows something at the very least, because it has truths in there. The only
Right.
question
It
to
has a
me
lot
is,
of truths that were not proved until recently.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that, yeah, like it's funny how you said that you kind of have started coming closer to this through like a maybe flat earth or
I would say flat Earth and the little season stuff in your
yeah, the
content. Those two
heliocentric model
things.
is flawed. But it's funny because I grew up in a church, and obviously I was taught the heliocentric model, and I'm a college graduate, so obviously I learned that. So when I first started going down like the rabbit hole and doing on this truth journey, I remember when I was on TikTok, I had a lot of people who were like believed in flat Earth and they believed in biblical cosmology, and they were starting to challenge me. It's like, okay, so you say you believe the Bible, but what about this part? What about the firmament? Do you believe in that? Do you believe in the waters above? And so, yeah, when you start to read like Genesis chapter 1 and you believe in the story of creation, you have to acknowledge, if you're being logically consistent, you have to say, this is not what we're taught. So if you believe this is the word of God, then this is true, then the other things cannot be true. So I remember like I didn't want to be a flat earther. I didn't want to believe in a dome, and I didn't want to believe in that stuff because I had a lot of people in my spheres tell me, hey, if you start talking about that, then they're going to reject all these other things you're saying.
Yeah, of course, you're a crazy person. Everyone knows that flat earthers are crazy people, and you lose all your friends, and you're an idiot. So why no one wants to go there?
It's of no benefit to me to believe that, because it would be easier to believe what everybody else believes, and then I could still talk about some of the things that I find interesting. And then I'd probably be more accepted, and I'd probably go on bigger podcasts because they wouldn't think like, oh, he's a crazy person. But if you're just being intellectually honest, you have to say, well, if this is what the evidence is leading me to believe, and if I am trying to be consistent saying I believe the scriptures, well, then which parts are you going to believe and which parts are you going to reject? So as you said, in Genesis 1:14, it says that God put two great lights in the sky, put greater light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night. And then he put the stars in there. So he put them in there for signs, for season, for days, and for years. And so, yeah, when you start to learn that, like that, it's saying that the sky is a clock. And so when you start to think about like the idea of the zodiac, or the Hebrews would have called it the Mazzaroth, that was one of those things that really challenged me. I'm like, okay, so these constellations have been the same as far as we can go back and find them. So if we are spinning, and I think the thing about like the heliocentric model, I didn't know what it really was until I started to look into this other stuff. Like everybody knows, they say the sun is basically the center of our galaxy and the Earth spins around it. But when I started to see the models of it corkscrewing through the universe and everything else spinning around it, I was like, that's what we believe? So the Earth spins at 1,000 miles an hour, and then it spins around the sun at like 66.6 thousand miles an hour. And I can't remember how fast they say the galaxy goes, but it's like a million.
It's like 500,000 miles per hour the sun is going through the galaxy, and the galaxy is moving at 2 million miles per hour, and then the whole universe is expanding at millions of miles an hour. It's like these ridiculous numbers nobody can comprehend, which is intentional. And when you cannot comprehend a number, you just revert to authority and just don't ask questions, which is why when you talk to flat earthers versus globers, flat earthers know so much more about the glober's own model. The globers have no idea. It's just,
Well, because there probably a lot of them are like me, because I remember when I first started questioning that, I went to a friend who believed in the heliocentric model, and he believed a lot of the same things I did. And I just started asking questions because I wanted to be able to have an answer when I did a live stream and people were questioning me about these things, because I wanted to shut the flat earthers up. I wanted them to be wrong. And when I first started asking him questions, he started to get really like almost like he was irritated that I was even asking them. I said, whoa, like I'm still on your side. Like I'm just asking questions. And I really was. I wasn't trying to provoke him. And you find out there's not good answers for these very obvious questions. It's kind of like what I was saying about the sky, like the firmament. You're like, okay, so there's this North Star that does not move. How does that make any sense if we are doing all the corkscrewing and all the spinning and all the expansion of the universe? And if we're moving, then all those other stars have to be moving too, right? Because if everything's moving, because obviously they're talking about like at least from like a secular perspective, like you have this big bang and you have this expansion of the universe, so that everything has been moving since that bang. Well, how have those constellations remained so constant? Because if you go back to, like, I think they say the oldest zodiac they've ever found is what they call is the Dendera zodiac, and this is from ancient Egypt. And I want to say they say it's about 4,000 years old. Okay, so all of this movement, and if you go look at those constellations, and they are exactly the same as they are today. And those constellations are constant. So yeah, like, you know what season you're in, because you can go look up in the sky and you can see where the sun sets. And what it says in Psalm 19, it talks about how there's these tabernacles for the sun, or these tents for the sun. So when the sun goes down at a certain time of year, you can look up and you can see what zodiac signs up there. And that's when you know exactly what season is. And so they come back every year at the exact same time. Just like it says in Genesis 1:14, it's a clock. And then if you think about another one, I know biblically, because we still get people who obviously say they believe the Bible and they reject this stuff. In Joshua chapter 10, it tells us about there's this battle between the Israelites and the Amorites. And there's this big battle, and Joshua prays to the Lord, and he wants there to be more daylight. So he prays for the sun and the moon to stop. So if the sun and the moon stop and the earth is still spinning, well, it really wouldn't change the amount of daylight you're getting, because we would still be spinning and we would still be night and day. But he's telling them to stop, and God stops them. And so they have enough daylight to fight the battle and, kill their enemies. So if the Bible says that and you believe it's true, well, how do you reconcile that versus what the science says?
Totally. And I have so many Christian friends. Even just in the last week, I was in a house with a bunch of guys, and a few of them are very hardcore Christians. I'm telling them this stuff. I'm saying, guys, your book is explaining this. It calls the world a circle, when in other parts of the book the word ball is used. It's not like they didn't know what a sphere is. They call the world a circle. And like you said, the very first few sentences of the first page, it says there's a firmament that separates the waters above from the waters below.
Yeah, the firmament. It's funny because that so many people want to deny what the firmament actually is. And I want to say that the Hebrew word was rakia, and it was like, it meant firm. It meant like solid. It meant like a solid object. So if you think about the days of creation, God took a whole day to create the firmament. So this is the thing that they basically say is just clouds or just the atmosphere or something like that. But God took a whole day to create it. And it says it separates the waters from the waters. So biblically, I mean, it's crystal clear. I mean, maybe just like the firmament is. It's like, it's clear where there's something that separates us from the water. It's above it. So it's not clouds. It's not condensation. It's like there's actual water up there. And it says there's water above the firmament. And it said that God separated the waters under the firmament, and he basically made the dry land to be exposed. So you have waters above, and it says there's waters below. So, I mean, like, that, I think that the whole realm we live in might be a giant sphere, but the part we live on, the plane we live on, is flat. I mean, it's flat from our perspective anyways.
Yeah, we don't know past the known world point, past Antarctica, because we're not allowed to go there. So it, like you said, it could be like a massive sphere.
We could be like in a giant snow globe. Yeah. Is almost what it sounds like it's describing.
And this is why we just need to bang the table and just get more people on board with this, and demand that we can go explore and figure this out, because there's so many questions that need to be answered. And one of the things I was going to bring up as well, just you're talking about the different things we're visualizing. Actually, before I go there, you're talking about the firmament and the waters above. I'm sure you've seen the videos of the rockets being launched that appear to scrape against something with water spraying out like a speedboat. Have you seen those videos?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It's funny. We were talking about that on the podcast recently, and I started to think that they're not going against the solid structure that's up there. I think that when you get in kind of like the old world research, some of the things that have been lost to us recently is like the idea of like the ether. So like the ether, I believe that maybe that's what they're hitting. There's some kind of a magnetic, energetic substances up there, and it's interacting with whatever the rockets are. Okay, because I think that whatever the ceiling would be like, I think it's really high. I don't know how high up it is. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows. Maybe the people who were doing Operation Fishbowl know how high it is. But yeah, I think that the way it looks like, I wonder if they're going through something that is like a liquid like substance up there.
Yeah, like there are different layers to it, and there are just so many questions about it. And my personal guess, just from the videos I've watched and research I've done, is that the highest point at the North Pole is around 73 miles, and it gets a little bit lower around the edges. But it's tough to say. We can only go off of some videos we've seen. And there's this other video of I'm sure you've seen the Go Fast rocket from 2014, this
Mm-hmm.
private rocket that got sent up, and the whole thing's on video, and it clanks into something at around 73 miles. So to me, that's interesting. We need more evidence, though. I want more private rockets going up, more videos, just more.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that's the only way to really find out. Is that's unfortunate. Is that the agency that would be able to give us the most understanding and actually real science about this, we trust the least, would be like NASA. Would be like the idea that we've been banging this gong since like the Artemis stuff was going on. We're like, why don't they have a continuous video of everything from the outside? Like one continuous like video. We're obviously they could do that, but they don't. So like if you could do that, like that would be actual science. I was saying like that, based on what they told us this Artemis 2 mission was, that they were going to only get within 4,000 miles of the moon. So like what is the point of that? If not to catalog for the general public the whole journey through all of it. But obviously they're not going to do that because I don't think that's going to prove their point. I think it's going to make their point seem silly in what they're actually doing. Like who knows what they're actually doing?
Yeah, there's so many holes in the Artemis 2 story. It's just been, and this is where you and I both have been really locking on this last couple of weeks, just start to finish. From the very first day, we got different types of videos for the launch. We have a friend of mine who was in Florida took a video from the beach. I don't know if you follow Flat World Logic on Instagram, but he shows it. It clearly does this big arc. It looks like it just goes into the water in the distance. And of course, they tell us it's going around a curve, it's going around the ball, but I don't know. I think it's just going in the ocean. And they immediately, like 2 minutes into the launch, first of all, the launch itself is bouncing all over the place. It cuts to black, like the worst camera work ever. And it switches to CGI in like a minute. And it just switches to that computer generated. So people aren't asking questions about this. Like you said, they should have a full video to, like, even if they couldn't live stream for whatever reason, they could share it later of like just one video camera on there. Or any of the satellites they have tens of thousands of satellites all over the place. They haven't ever zoomed in on Australia so we could see an upside down sailboat. Or we still haven't gotten a single picture of the Earth that isn't computer generated. I mean, every single one looks different each year.
That was one of the things that really kind of got me over the hump, if you will, was that when I first started talking about stuff on social media, I was clowning on the moon landing almost from the very beginning, because that was one of the conspiracies that I was like, okay, so they lied about 2020. So what about 1969? And so, yeah, once you look into that, you're like, I can't believe I ever believed any of this stuff. And so what I learned from that was pictures from the Earth. The very first one, like the first blue marble picture they got, was on the way to the moon. If that's the only picture they've got is the ones from the moon missions, then I got a problem with that. Now I'm really starting to question that. So yeah, it's like an idea of, if this stuff is real, the curve is real, and all the things they're saying are real, then why can't they give us real pictures? Because yeah, what you find out later is that all the pictures of the Earth are like composite images, probably from low-level satellites, where they stitch them together in order to make animation. They make something that's obviously not real. But if you could get that far away, and obviously you've got the Hubble telescope and you've got all these other satellites up there, why can't you give us real images? Even I saw a guy like on X post this video, and he's just asking questions. If you go like Google Earth, you can zoom down into people's backyards, but as soon as you start zooming up at a certain level, it reverts to animation. So if the satellites are up there, then why would it ever revert to animation?
Right.
So that's a question you have to ask. And obviously, if you ever seen the pictures of the satellites, they don't even try to make them look real.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite posts I've been boosting over and over is just go to Google and type in either rocket in space or satellite in space and tell me what you see. It's all a bunch of animation. It's all computer generated images. There's no actual real pictures of them in space. And it would be quite hard to get a picture of them, to be fair, because they're supposedly moving at 17,000 miles per hour. Like 40,000 plus of these things. And this is one of the posts I made around Artemis as well, is that they say there's 40,000 satellites, like large satellites, being zooming around at 17,000 miles an hour. That's 10 times faster than the speed of a sniper bullet. Okay, we can't, speaking of incomprehensible numbers we were talking about earlier, that's like, you're not seeing that. That's like moving so fast you can't even comprehend. But there's millions of other pieces of space junk out there as well. This is all, you can just Google AI this. But the Artemis people aren't concerned about this for some reason. Did they just go right through it? That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, that they got to be really lucky to not bang into one of those. Because imagine if you hit something going that fast, would probably damage the rocket a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you see what like birds do to planes when they hit them going, like 600 miles an hour. It like destroys like the whole nose cone on like a 747 plane, which are huge. So what would it be like if you were going, I want to say that wasn't within 4 minutes, the Artemis rocket was supposed to be going like 4,000 to 6,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, something insane.
And so if you think about it, like an SR-71 Blackbird, I think that goes like 1,700 miles an hour. So it's funny to even see. I know that there was a video supposedly from a plane showing Artemis going above the clouds. Okay, so at that point, it would have been going 6,000 miles an hour. It doesn't look like it's going that fast. It doesn't look like it's going fast at all. I mean, if you think about it, like the idea, I know my buddy Brian, he did a video about the Iron Dome being fake. Because a lot of the stuff yeah. But it's interesting, like the Iron Domes supposedly can't hit ballistic missiles. I mean, that's what basically these rockets are. They're ballistic missiles, but like those missiles seem to like they go a lot faster than that rocket that went up. So what would it really look like if they were going 10,000 miles an hour? I think it would be like a streak. Like you wouldn't be able to hardly even see it. It'd be going by so fast.
Yeah, and people just say like, oh, it's after it's gone out of our view that happens, but we've never seen it actually happen. They just tell us that. Like we said, it switches to computer animation in like a minute, specifically so no one can see it. The people who are closest to being able to see it in Florida, who actually took the videos, they see it moving slow the entire time. You can watch the thing just going off in the distance.
Based on the idea of like the curvature of the Earth and how far like our own vision can basically see. I mean, if it's going 6,000 miles an hour, I don't know how many miles, like how fast they're going per second, but it seemed like it would be gone pretty quick, where you would not be able to see it. It's going so fast. But yeah, it does seem like it's going up slowly. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going that fast. And then obviously when they talk about the reentry of the Artemis capsule, it was going 25,000 miles an hour. It should have been down to Earth almost within seconds going that fast. But as soon as it enters our atmosphere, it slows down to 300 miles an hour real fast. And if you think about the physics of that in the human body, you're going 25,000 miles an hour and then you go to 300 miles an hour. That would seem like quite a jolt. That would be like hitting a brick wall, like times like a million. If you saw like how can they deal with that? But yet, again, they show us all these goofy videos of them floating around with their food and stuff with a Nutella and some little dumb ball, but they don't have a continuous shot of the astronauts in the capsule as they're going 25,000 miles to the parachute. Like if they want to cut away, they should be cutting away to inside the rocket or inside whatever they're in, the spaceship. But they don't do that. And yeah, when I actually did look up the splashdown video, it was so weird. It was black and white, and it was almost like a thermal view, and then they would cut back to color. And if you think about it, like it's going so fast, and then they're just going to deploy these flimsy little parachutes, and they're not going to just get shredded. You know, like I said, can you imagine like an SR-71 Blackbird flying as fast as it does, just deploying parachutes? Do you think those parachutes would last? They would burst into flames probably.
Yeah. They'd be gone immediately. And the whole heat thing too. They say that as it's coming through the atmosphere, it's like 5,000 degrees, like crazy scalding hot from going through the atmosphere.
It's 71 degrees inside the capsule.
Yeah, and as soon as it hits the water, there's no steam anywhere. A lot of people notice that there's no steam, where boiling water is a teeny tiny fraction of that. So many questions. So many questions.
You know, the question I had was, so I'm older than you, so I was of the age where I got to watch the Challenger blow up in my classroom in elementary school.
You must have been pretty young for that, right?
Yeah, that was like second grade, I think. I was watching that in my classroom. And, and back in those days, the rockets went up and they had a space shuttle attached to them. And so like the idea was that they were going to go zoom around outer space and the space shuttle, and then they were going to come land like on a runway. So why have we gone backwards in that technology? Because it seems a lot less, I don't know, technologically advanced to fall down in some little teardrop, when back in the 80s, they could fly down like with some kind of a space jet that would come and land on a runway. What happened to that? Did they lose that technology too?
Yeah, NASA loves losing technology. It's just ever since 1969, where they had the absolute best, where they could just go onto the moon and play some golf and come home. That was really the pinnacle. Before we even had a TV remote, they could pan up perfectly from the moon from some cameraman we don't even know where he was.
Well, right. So like somebody asked a great question in my comments today, and they said, if they can land on the moon, why can't they land back on Earth?
True. Well, they probably say, "Oh, the gravity's stronger here."
If they can land on the moon, why can't they just land that thing back on Earth? Like, why do they have to land in the ocean?
Yeah. Lots of questions. I'm hopeful that this woke a lot of people up, because I just saw so much content being pumped out about it, and that's why we were both really focused on pushing that out, because that's a good opportunity to just encourage people to really look at these details that we're talking about very critically, and remember that the government agencies are not our friends. There's so many weird coincidences. All of the astronauts that landed on the moon were all Freemasons. NASA and numerology adds up to 666. Their logo is a snake tongue. All of these things that we see posted all over the
NASA
place.
in Hebrew means to deceive.
It's endless. There's so many, and I really think that they're just absolutely laughing in our faces that we believe this stuff. But we just need to keep pointing these things out, and I see more and more people thinking, you know what, these things are kind of weird. Maybe I should be looking at other stuff more closely.
Well, I think this is a situation where I could see so many Globers were so ready to just shove this in our face and say, "See, you morons, see, this is real." But I think that if you gave them some truth serum, they would say, NASA really didn't give me the goods to shut these guys up. Actually, it's done the opposite. And so I started to wonder this recently, because I did a video about, they had that thing, Fly Me to the Moon, that movie that came out on Apple a couple years ago. And it was funny because, like, in that movie that, it's the famous space race between Russia and America. And there's this one guy, Woody Harrelson, who's like probably in the CIA. They don't really say, but probably. And he's saying, we can't lose to the Russians, so we're going to make a backup video for them. We're going to fake the moon landing just in case the mission fails, because we can't afford to fail. And it was funny, in that movie, they called it Artemis. Like, it was called Project Artemis. And I was like, that's a lot. But then somebody else pointed me to this movie from the 70s. It was called Capricorn 1. And it was about them faking a Mars landing. So like in this movie, they were going to, there was something like they were actually supposed to go to Mars, but there was a problem with the craft and the life support system in it. So they weren't going to be able to make it. They were going to die. So these government officials decided to pull these astronauts aside and say, we're actually just going to send a rocket up and we're going to hide you guys. And then we're going to film this stuff in the desert. And then I think supposedly in the movie, like the whatever craft or whatever rocket came in re-entry and blew up. So I think eventually, like, the government's going to kill them, so because they can't be alive afterwards. So almost kind of like the Challenger story. But I started to wonder this, like, what if that's really what's happening? Is that there's nobody on those rockets, and that's why we never got video for them going up. We never got video from them going up on the rocket, and we never got video of them coming back down.
You did see the little gondola right as it was launching. Those little gondolas.
Right. Yeah. There was this
came down.
gondola coming down. So
Interesting.
like, is that where the astronauts actually went? So I started to think about this, and I really thought about this before, was the idea that they launched the rockets from Cape Canaveral in Florida. But then as soon as, like, I noticed this when I was watching that movie Fly Me to the Moon, was as soon as the rocket got up, the guys are like taking off their headsets and they're saying, all right, Houston, you've got it. So the rocket goes up in Florida, but like the mission control is in Houston. So the people who didn't even see the rocket actually even launch are the people that are actually communicating with the astronauts, supposedly. So if you really think about it like that, what if they were just sending rockets up, and then so eventually like the capsule comes down, it comes down in the Pacific Ocean. So it doesn't even come down near Florida, it comes down the Pacific. So this is how that when people say like, well, how could this all be fake? Because there's so many people at NASA that they would know. But we're talking about like the people who shoot the rockets up are not the same people who talk to the rockets, and they're not the same people who pick the astronauts up. So like, what if that's really what they're just doing? They're sending up rockets. They're literally sending up like ballistic missiles, and there's nobody on them. And then we get videos later of them floating around and doing all the stuff, and they're probably, you see bubbles, and maybe they're in a pool or something. The point is, they're not on a rocket. They're not in outer space, and they're definitely not on the moon. I don't know.
Yeah, and that is the biggest question I think is worth highlighting, because I get that constantly, is think about how many people would have to be in on it. How could all of these smart people in NASA be in on it, and SpaceX and all these other space agencies? For me, my answer, and you can elaborate in your own way, let's see what you say differently, but I just think it's so compartmentalized in these agencies that they have people doing all these tiny little tasks everywhere. And I want to know what percentage of the jobs at NASA are just creating models or working on computer programs. I feel like a vast majority of it, like, because we all have smart friends who have gone into these sort of fields. I can't name any off the top of my head. They probably blocked me a while ago. People I knew in college because they've seen my posts. But I think they just, one of my other theories is that not only is it really compartmentalized to get these people in these little jobs everywhere, so they don't really know the bigger picture, and only very few people at the top know the actual big picture of it staged. But I think that these agencies are partially put in place specifically to siphon up all these really smart, high IQ technical minds to have them working on nonsense. So they can't be out fixing real things in the world. Do you think that's too big of a stretch?
No, somebody quoted, and I forgot what movie it was in, but it was something. It was like a quote from Val Kilmer in a movie, and he was basically saying like that what they are actually doing at NASA is creating weapons. You know, like they don't, but these people don't know that they're doing that. Like I said, they're creating these giant missiles, and then you could imagine this tech is used for war and not for space exploration. I think it makes perfect sense. Like I said, it's pretty compartmentalized just based on what I just described, was that the people who shoot the rockets up are not the same people who talk to the rockets, and they're not the same people who pick the astronauts up. So how the heck do they actually know if they've accomplished their mission? Oh, because they're talking to them some other place? Well, I mean, we know that they could probably get a radio to work from Earth to Earth. So who are they actually talking to, and where are they actually at? So yeah, I think that absolutely makes sense, is that nobody really knows. And I want to say that even from NASA's own mouth, they would say that the people in these command centers can't tell the difference between a actual rocket launch and a simulation. So are those people, are we supposed to trust them? So who are we supposed to trust in this scenario? Because these people couldn't even say with any certainty that they know what happened, because they're not there. And so, yeah, you think about it, like we're only talking about like 4 astronauts. These people would know if they went to the moon or not. But then you get the idea that I think some of this could be involved, like the MK Ultra project, where they could be messing with these people too. Like what makes somebody the right candidate to be an astronaut? Well, we're told it's, you know, super fit people who were like pilots, people like who are like scientific geniuses and things like that. But what if it's something more like they are victims of hypnosis or mind control, and so they don't even know? So if you see like, the Apollo 11 astronauts, like a Buzz Aldrin, this guy seems really confused. he's so contradictory about like whether they went or they didn't go. I mean, obviously you see videos of him saying that they did go. He's willing to punch somebody to defend that. But then he's also telling a little girl that we didn't actually go to the moon. And the things that the astronauts said, especially was it Mike Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong, when you see that press conference when they first came back, something was off. Something was way off. This looked like a hostage video. And they don't remember if they saw stars or not. And that's the same question that I think the astronauts on this Artemis mission got asked about the stars. And there's like this hesitation. It's like the first time there's actually a delay in the video. And that's the justification is why they hesitated for so long. But it's like an obvious question you'd get.
Oh, I don't think there was a delay. You could see what's her name, the lady Christina. I think the second the question is asked, she kind of looks over like, who's going to answer this one? That's the question that paralyzes them every time, because there's been so many back and forth stories on that ever since the beginning. And we've had...
well, I mean, again, famously during that press conference when they first got asked about it, Mike Collins was saying, I don't remember seeing any stars. And then you could see Buzz Aldrin's head like whips like right away, like almost like shut up,
script,
like
bro.
yeah, like stop talking, because it's a situation where they always say that if you're a liar, you got to have a good memory. And especially if you have multiple people lying, like you got to have your story straight. And I think that's the difference, because I think there's been other astronauts who talked about seeing all the amazing stars that you could ever imagine. Unfortunately, they don't show us when they fly to the moon. Like, why wouldn't you just take your cell phone and go right up to the window, video anything you could possibly get out the window? But they don't do that. They give us the video from a ways back with the window in the background, like why, or in the foreground. Like, why is that there? It's, again, it seems like that there's certainly people that could be astronauts that do know, but that there could be some situation where they don't really know. I mean, the really interesting thing I find about like the Apollo moon mission was that, so Neil Armstrong, the first guy supposedly that ever walked on the moon, for one, he didn't seem enthused at all when he was at that press conference, even though if you see the prior, like the pre-flight press conferences, these guys are joking around, they're back slapping, they're like the bells at the ball. They're having the best time ever. And it's like a hostage video when they come back. Neil Armstrong only gave one other public interview ever after that about landing on the moon. Now, like, you've done something, well, supposedly you've done something no one's ever done. You're the first person, and you'll be the only first person ever to do this. You would think you'd be taking like a victory lap the rest of your life talking about that. But he didn't want to talk about it for some reason. So my question is why? Maybe it was a situation just like that movie Capricorn 1, where they pulled them off at the last minute and said, we can't do it. We're not going to make it. So we're going to do this, and you guys are going to come back and you guys are going to sell it. And he was like, I don't want to sell it. He's like, you're going to do what we said you're going to do. Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard of Gus Grissom and the Apollo 1 astronauts, right? Gus Grissom was originally going to be the first man to land on the moon. He was chalked up for that. And he started going against the grain. He put a lemon on the lander to basically make a joke and say, this thing is a piece of junk. We're not going to go to the moon in this. And he started speaking against NASA. And next thing you know, a couple of days later, they all get burned out inside this like fully oxygenated tank that's like set up to kill people.
Yeah, he said that he made over like 1,000 different complaints during the lead up to the Apollo missions. And he, like, one of his complaints was that they couldn't get an intercom to work between the buildings, but yet Richard Nixon could talk to the moon in 1969 from a landline. Yeah, that don't make sense.
Yeah, they had to switch him out for some people that would be with the program, or they got their Freemasons.
Well, yeah, like I said, if you think about it, like, again, the fear that's instilled if like Neil Armstrong does know what happened to these other astronauts, and then they tell you you're going to play ball or that.
Yeah. And there are just so many videos. And like you said, he hasn't done any more public scheduled interviews. But when he's forced into these interactions, I'm sure you've seen the Bart Sibrel videos of him going up to the astronauts saying, will you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon? And you mentioned Buzz Aldrin punched him in the face. And Neil Armstrong just said like, "Oh, just probably a fake Bible. I'm not doing that." And he's like, "Well, if it's a fake Bible, then why wouldn't you do it? Like, who cares?" And he just keeps refusing, giving all these excuses for why he won't do it, but none of them will. None of them will. So it's you can sense, if you have a good sense for body language and just watch the actions and what people like Buzz Aldrin is saying. He lets it slip out sometimes in his interviews, literally telling people to their face that they never went there, and they just still can't accept it because it's so ingrained in their brain. Anyone that was alive back then, I wasn't. Neither of us were for 1969, but that was just, we're told that is the greatest accomplishment in human history. So people all have this really strong emotional connection to it. And it seems like all the ones after that, all the different NASA missions after that, have been less than that one, but they're still targeting that emotional center of pride. And for this Artemis one, you can see certain people, and you and I both, we dabble around in a bunch of different communities on the internet. And for me, I'm following a lot of people that are in like the nationalism stuff. I think that's an interesting thing. These people are so proud of this moon thing. Look at these awesome white people going up and doing these amazing white people things. I'm like, guys, it's a scam.
I've heard that yeah, some of the white nationalist type folks are upset at us because it's like, oh, you're trying to actually diminish the accomplishments of white people. And you're like, I don't care what color they are. Like I know that, again, I don't have any problem saying that you can identify with your race and you can have pride in that. I don't think that's a bad thing. But at the same time, like, no, I'm not attributing every good act in the earth ever being to white people. And I know that they're flawed because I'm a white person. I'm pretty flawed. So like, I don't trust you based on your skin color. I don't necessarily distrust you based on your skin color. So yeah, I guess that just gets silly.
And some people just get too deep into thinking that it's only Jews that lie to us. Like you talked about the Hebrew definition of NASA is to deceive. That's interesting. But if you ask anyone on Earth, like, what race of people do you attribute NASA to? It's white people, and there are a lot of them lying too. And we need to stand for the truth no matter who's lying to us. I think it just needs to be more universal. So hopefully this gets more people on track, but I'm going to keep posting about it anyway. I want to get back to the history stuff. We kind of diverted. I'm glad we got to talk about that because that's some recent news. But the little season thing, this is the reason why I originally found you. I think it was you and Demon Erasers talking about this stuff on YouTube. And to me, this is such a fascinating topic. And what has really gotten me to question more things about history and Christianity and religion, because I've done some episodes in the past about the old world Tartaria stuff, but there's such a huge mystery there. There's always been a big mystery. There still is, but the little season theory it has an answer for this, for why we have these incredible buildings and structures everywhere that just make no sense and don't seem to fit with what technology these people were supposed to have back then of donkey carts and carriages. So could you give just the elevator pitch of what is this little season eschatology thing, and how would you present it to someone in your own way?
From a Christian perspective, when I mentioned that Jesus shows up at this very specific time based on these prophecies from the prophet Daniel, when Daniel gets his prophecy, this is during the captivity of Babylon. So 70 years before he gets his prophecy, Babylon had taken Judah into captivity, destroyed Jerusalem, broke down the walls, burned the temple to the ground. And so this next prophecy is based on that the temple is going to be rebuilt. The decree to build the temple. This is when it kicks off like these 70 weeks. And so the Messiah shows up at the end of this prophecy. And then it leads to what's called the abomination of desolation and Jerusalem being made desolate. So when you talk about like the end times, as far as the Bible is concerned, Jesus and all the apostles are talking about the end times being the times they're living in. So there's this one famous sermon by Jesus when he's specifically asked about the end times. They asked him about the temple, and they asked Jesus, look how great this temple is. And this is what's called the Olivet Discourse. And so Jesus said, you see that temple there? You see these buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another that will not be thrown down. And then so the apostles, right after they asked him, they said, tell us about the signs of this, when this will be, and you're coming in the end of the age or the end of the world. So Jesus lays out all the signs that are going to come precede the destruction of the temple and his return after he's crucified, ascends to heaven and comes back. So he lays out all these signs that are supposed to happen. And then he says, before he ends, he says, truly, I tell you, before this generation passes away, all these things will come to pass. All these things will take place. So he's telling them that he's returning in their generation. So a lot of people try to deny that. They say, because we know Christ has not returned. But then if you read the letters from the apostles, they're all pointing to it being the end. They're all pointing to his return being very imminent. So John says that they're living in the last hour. Peter tells people in his epistle that the end of all things is at hand. Paul tells people it's better not to get married because the world as we know it's about to end. It says in the book of Revelation, of course, it says a bunch of different times, it says that Jesus is coming soon. The very end of the book of Revelation, it says that do not seal up this prophecy because the time is at hand. So what's interesting, those Daniel prophecies, Daniel is told to seal up this prophecy until the times of the end. So you have like this 500-year prophecy that Daniel's told to seal up because it's not for the people now. And then John is told in the book of Revelation that all these things are about to take place like right now. Like the times are at hand. So with that idea is like so what if Jesus kept his word and he did come back in that first century? Well, in Revelation chapter 20, it tells us what happens right afterwards. The devil's bound, he's put in a pit, the saints are resurrected, and then they rule for 1,000 years with Christ, and they're priests and kings. So with that idea, after that 1,000 years, there's something called the little season. And this is a prophecy, and a lot of Christians deny that the little season is biblical, but it's in Revelation chapter 20. It says that the devil is put in a pit for 1,000 years, but afterwards he must be loosed for a little season. And he goes out to the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, deceives the nations, and he brings them together for this battle at the end. And then fire comes down from heaven, the devil and his armies are destroyed. So that's a prophecy that most people don't talk about because I don't think they think it's relevant to them, because we know that Jesus has not come back yet. But what if he did? And what if, like, the old world architecture could be evidence that there was this 1,000 years? There was a better time than this. It was a different time than this. It just seems like that, without getting too much into the weeds, whatever economy, whatever kind of structure that was taking place then was different than now. I don't think that's debatable. I mean, the beauty, the grandeur of these buildings, the statues they created, the art, the things they did, it does not make sense to us in a time where we're supposedly more advanced, when this should be more easy to do this. Like, we should be able to build it faster and cheaper. But when you start to look at some of the timelines of the buildings, especially in America, you got these 1-year timelines on these buildings that are these Greco-Roman masterpieces that are all of stone and marble. Like, so how does that make sense? And so, yeah, when you start to look at the history of what we're told, it doesn't make any sense. So it's led a lot of us to conclude that maybe it is. Maybe the devil has deceived all the nations, and maybe that's why the lies seem endless in the time we're living in right now.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you've heard of John Levy, the YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, I've watched a lot of his stuff. Mm.
He has this shtick he does called "Where Are We?", where he has these videos of, he just goes through these different pictures of these different old photos with these incredible buildings, and he asks, "Where do you think we are? Where do you think this is?" And it's everywhere. Like, it could be in America or Europe or China or Africa, like these incredible buildings that just don't make any sense how they could have been built at these periods with this technology. And this is why, to me, when I stumbled across your content about the little season stuff, and another channel I'm sure you've heard of is Jason Jack. He does a lot of...
Oh yeah, friends of Jason.
I think that was the first thing I actually watched, was that full playlist he did, like 10 or 11 videos, basically breaking the whole thing down. And to me, I was just thinking, you know what? I don't know how these things were made, so I have a little bit more open-mindedness to these theories that are outside of my usually, like, evidence requiring process. You know, like maybe they were built by angels, you know, because when you walk inside these things, I can't physically understand how humans could have made this. And I've been to Europe several times. Have you been to Europe and looked at these
No,
cathedrals?
unfortunately, that's on my list. I want to go to Italy next.
Well, you don't even
Yeah.
have to go there to see some of these buildings. They're all over the place, but some of the most incredible ones are in Europe for sure. And it just, I don't care how often people will say, oh, people just cared more back then. They had so much free time. It just doesn't make sense. Even in Seattle, where I'm from, I've walked around the city and there's some crazy stuff there. The Smith Tower was this old, allegedly an airship docking station, this huge pointy tower with a point at the top that, and there's some old pictures that look like airships docking there. The whole lobby is just made of solid marble. They say that came from Alaska. And I asked the tour guide that I was doing this with, is how'd they get all these millions of tons of marble here from Alaska with horses and carriage? Like, that's kind of a huge undertaking. Alaska's very far away from Washington. Oh, I don't know. They just did it. Like, there are no roads or anything, but there's so many holes here.
Yeah. So like the biblical case was what kind of solidified it for me. But I was going down the rabbit hole. So when I was on TikTok, I did like to follow some of the accounts that talked about Tartaria, the mud flood. I like the stuff about like meltology. And I kind of just put it aside because I really didn't know where to fit any of that stuff in, especially in like the general macro view of the things I was talking about. Like I don't understand how this makes sense biblically. So when I did kind of get into the idea of what if this is evidence of Christ's millennial kingdom, that actually kind of tied it together, and that actually made me want to research it more. But I thought these topics were kind of disconnected. But if you think about what the Bible talks about, the day of the Lord being coming with this fervent heat and the mountains are going to melt like wax. When I started to go out west in places like Arizona and Utah, when I started to go out those places, I was just like, there's something terrible happened here. I mean, it's beautiful, but like something like a cataclysm happened in this place. And so I saw a buddy of mine. He's another good channel if you want to check him out. Is he goes by Alpha Talks on YouTube, and he kind of put a lot of this stuff together. And that plus what they call the mud flood, because that's what you can't really separate Tartaria in the old world from these buildings all having these lower levels, like multiple floors under the ground, and all like the best buildings in the world seem to have sediment to go up past what was originally the first floor, at least. And so, yeah, when I started to do research into like the western part of America, like Seattle, for instance, I guess from a person from Virginia and like knowing, the kind of conventional story about America, you have 1492, you have the colonization by the Europeans coming over here. And so you think, there was Europeans here in Virginia in the 1500s. Okay, so there's plenty of time to expand westward and build all the buildings that they did. So like I never really questioned it. I guess we weren't really taught too much about it, but like the idea of like a Lewis and Clark after the Louisiana Purchase by Thomas Jefferson, they're going to explore like past the Mississippi River. They're going down the Missouri River and they're exploring, they're mapping out this new territory. And this was like in the early 1800s. So I guess I never really thought about like the timelines of like the cities that are not west of the Mississippi, but like a city like Chicago, Chicago being one of the most famous cities in America. It was I want to say in 1840, there was like 4,500 people that lived there. But by the time you see the first pictures of Chicago, it's massive. It's the Chicago that we all know. And then, so if you think of like a city like Seattle, I want to say that its founding date was probably like 1870 or something like that. And then when you see the pictures of it,
like that, yeah,
yeah, it's so obviously it's much later. So if you think about like San Francisco as well, San Francisco, we get that famous story about the 49er gold rush. So in 1849, you get all these people going out there to look for gold, supposedly. But in 1848, San Francisco only had 1,000 people in it. But then by the time you see pictures of San Francisco in like 1870, there is a panoramic shot of the city, and there's not one bit of construction happening. There's no scaffolding. There's nothing. You see a whole built out city that has Greco-Roman architecture. It's got Gothic cathedrals. And you also have, or what you don't have, is you don't have any people in the pictures. The city is San Francisco. It looks like it does today. maybe actually looks better
It
than it
looks
does
better.
today.
There's literally more cool buildings in there than there are now. They chopped a bunch of them down through the World Fair and everything.
So what you get into though, like with a city like Seattle and almost every city like on the West Coast, they all have underground sections of these cities. So when you think about like the timeline of these buildings, what makes even less sense to me, it makes no sense to me that they could build a city, the lack of logistical infrastructure to be able to, I mean, it's one thing to have a train, but you have to take the materials off the train or off out of the harbor and then take them by horse and cart, millions of pounds of stone to build whole
No
cities out of.
roads. Like, how much water do you need for these horses? How do you get these gigantic pillars up? I don't care how many horses you have. Those things are just enormous. Doesn't make sense.
No, and I mean, again, it's like it's a situation of we don't see buildings like that going up today. So why was it ever practical for anybody to do it when it would clearly have been harder back then? I mean, that's at the very least. But not only that, there is cities under the cities too. So I want to say the story of Seattle was like so stupid. I was like almost like I can't even believe like this is the real story. What they said was Seattle had a problem with flooding like early on, where like literally this woman did this video about it, and she might have been BSing, but I think she was telling the story. She was saying that there was such bad flooding that they literally had like life preservers like on the streets. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard the life preserver part.
It was absolutely insane. So the story goes that they had this massive flooding problem, but eventually the city burned down, like almost all these cities in America did. Like I said, go research Great Fire of ... Any city in America, just put it in there. There's at least one Great Fire. So what we're told is Seattle burned down, and then they thought this would be a good idea to build on top of that old city that burned down, and that would help with the flooding or something like that.
But don't forget the story of how it burned down. The story of how it burned down, I'm pretty sure it's like a cow kicked over a candle or something.
Well, that's maybe that's the same one in Seattle, but I do know that I think it was is it Molly the cow or something like that kicked over a lamp in Chicago and burned the whole city.
Maybe
down.
it was Chicago. Let me look this up. What caused the Seattle Great Fire? Every single one has this ridiculous story. A 24-year-old Swede was heating glue over a gasoline fire when it boiled over, igniting the wood chips and burning the whole city down.
And that's the funny thing when you see the pictures of what the cities look like when they were burned down. Yeah. They look very akin to what you'd see from like World War I or World War II when the cities looked like they were bombed out. I mean, I don't even know if the stories of the fires were even real at all, because what they say, like in the story of San Francisco. So I want to say it had maybe like 5 or 6 great fires and like 2 major earthquakes during the same time. So they're telling us that they built wood buildings back then and they burned down, and then they eventually built, brick and stone buildings. But the first pictures you ever see, they're all look like they're brick and stone. Like all of them are. I mean, that's the thing, is like these people are not living in shanties, and that's what you'd expect if you just had miners coming out there just to mine gold. Like in the meantime, they're building like one of the grandest cities in all of America. Baloney. But I mean, the point is that stone and brick buildings don't burn down with regular fire. That's why your fireplace is made of brick, because brick's got to get really hot to melt. So it looks like these places were bombed. At least the pictures were shown. And I don't doubt that they actually did dynamite some of the buildings, because even in the stories of these great fires, supposedly that's what they did in some cases, because supposedly they were trying to stop the fire. So they were deciding to blow up some buildings, kind of like what you'd have like a controlled burn, like in a forest, to prevent it from continuing to burn. But that's kind of what they're telling us they did. They end up dynamiting some of the buildings to prevent it from burning down more of the city, I guess. But I'm saying like those stories are the same stories repeated over and over again all throughout America, where it almost does seem like this is a paint by numbers thing, like that we're going to say that this happened everywhere. But then when like you see like the pictures like the World Fair from like the 1890s, these cities like Chicago, St. Louis, they look like the most pristine vision of like what you could imagine Rome to be like when Rome was on top of the world. That's what it looks like. And then they tell us those buildings were actually not permanent buildings. They were temporary structures, but they look like anything but temporary. They look ultra massive, ultra intricate. They look unreal. They look unreal. They look unreal to like people like us. And I think, again, that's a problem with this narrative is that when I went to visit New York City in 2017, I think from a person from Virginia, that was the first time I ever went. I expected the most impressive things to be things like the Empire State Building, like buildings like the skyscrapers, whatever. But then you just find all these interesting old buildings that are Greco-Roman or these Gothic cathedrals. And like, I don't know, like I don't know if you can overstate the fact that the oldest buildings in America are the best ones. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like you go to see like Washington D.C., those buildings that they built supposedly in the 1800s or the early 1900s, those things are far superior to anything they've built in the last 50 years. By a long shot.
Not by a little bit, like an enormous margin. Like these are incredible, breathtaking structures that have these stories around them that don't make sense, like you mentioned. I just pulled up a picture on a tab here to remember the name. You're talking about San Francisco. There's this place called the Palace of Fine Arts, which you may have heard of. This beautiful little dome structure thing, which when I lived in the Bay Area...
it's not little. It's actually not little. It's huge.
Yeah, huge. I'm talking in like comparison to all the other stuff is even bigger, but from now, we look at it, it's huge. It's a giant towering structure. And I lived in the Bay Area a few years ago, and I just walked through there, took pictures of it, thought, oh, that's cool. But we just don't even think about this stuff until we actually really dig into it and say, wait a minute, this does not fit the timeline.
You know what's interesting one about San Francisco? I did a video about this a while back. I saw this old TikTok video of this woman talking about how I forgot exactly what year she was saying it was. It was sometime like at the turn of the century, maybe like the early 20th century, maybe late 18th century or 19th century, that they had this old graveyard in San Francisco. And they were going to move this graveyard, I guess, because they needed to build more buildings or something. And so the rich people got to pay to move their plots. But if you didn't pay, they literally took the mausoleums and the headstones and they ground them up and they turned them into gutters and bulkheads. So she was like walking around gutters and you could see partially where they had like a name or they had like a date of another date on there. And of course, in this research, I said, what if the reason they did that was because there was going to be some dates on there that were not going to fit with the founding of San Francisco, as we're told? Because I want to say historically, the Spanish discovered San Francisco Bay in 1776. That's how recent San Francisco is. So it's as new as the whole country is, supposedly. But yet, when you see old maps, there's old maps, I want to say from like the 1500s, 1600s, where it says S Francisco or San Francisco, like right where it's at. So like, what if the reason they destroyed this old graveyard, and they've done this in many places, like places out west where they moved a bunch of graves, which we don't seem like we ever do that today. Maybe they wanted to remove some of the evidence that this place is much older than that.
And they do all this funny wordplay too. Like I know there's a whole different side of research of just questioning if the one before in the four number date where it says 18 whatever, it's actually an I sometimes, which could mean something totally different. That could have been sort of manipulated. They always say they're founded, which seems like they were found. I feel like that's kind of right in your face, that the words they use on these giant buildings.
It does seem like that's on the nose. And what these buildings often have is one cornerstone with a Freemason date on it of when they founded it. What I've kind of concluded in my research is the idea that, and I'll give credit to my buddy. He's another guy you should check out. His name Paul Stobbs. He goes by Understanding Conspiracy on YouTube. We talked a lot about all this stuff. And so he kind of said that Freemasonry is almost like they founded some Freemasonry and said like that. Is that why they called them the Freemasons? Because these guys are given credit for all the building of things. But now what we have is Masons today are speculative Masons. So supposedly they switched into like when they were actually practical, real builders of things, and then they became speculative Masons, and they don't actually build anything. Which, of course, if you're this secret group that really is founded on the idea of knowledge, like how does the knowledge of building all these buildings, how does that ever go away?
Yeah.
The same thing if you actually look into the Gothic cathedrals. Supposedly they were building them like crazy in Europe for like a certain amount of time. And obviously they're all in America, South America, Australia, Canada, everywhere. They were building them at a very specific time, and then they supposedly don't know how to build those anymore either. Now, they just did build the one, I want to say it's the, was it Sagra Familia? And that's a building they supposedly took 180 years to build, 100, maybe 140 years. It's not near as cool as any of the other ones. Honestly, if you look close at it, it looks really cheesy in spots. But these other cathedrals, supposedly it took them like 500 or 600 years to build. But if you actually look at the buildings, and if you're into construction and all, which I have a background in construction, what you would notice if they did take 500 to 600 years to build something, you would see the stopping and starting points. You would see the different layers or the different kinds of places where this is newer and this is older. But like these buildings they look like they were built at the same time. They look like, I wouldn't say they were built quick, but they were built by the same people.
Yeah.
Because I don't know you could continue to pass down that knowledge and then eventually be forgotten.
Without making a single mistake anywhere. None of them have any mistakes ever. The only mistakes on them are the things that we screw up here in the modern age, and they change it around, or they destroy it or burn it.
Well, they can't fix them. Like I said, if you actually look at them where they've tried to repair some of these old buildings and they can't do it, you can see the patches and they're just so obvious and it looks ridiculous.
And sometimes they're even completely manipulating parts of it. And we talked about this earlier, how they're changed specifically to change the narrative. And I'm sure you've heard of the Prague astronomical clock. That's a common topic of discussion in the flat Earth world because it clearly shows a flat Earth map on there moving around what looks like a clock version of the moon map. I got to go see it myself last summer, which was super cool. I watched it, and you can see on the middle of the clock itself what used to be a flat Earth map they put a fucking globe on there. They literally changed this beautiful piece of history and just like slapped a globe on it because it's like too obviously showing flat Earth cosmology on there. And this sort of stuff is happening everywhere. And I'm sure you know the channel My Lunch Break. He's really big on all this old world stuff. He follows and really documents all of these buildings that are just going up in flames all over the place, and they say, oh, we had a fire, another fire. There's all these fires that they say are freak accidents, but I think this is just a destruction campaign to get rid of the evidence because too many people are realizing that there's some huge holes in the story we're told about history, which is, funnily enough, called the Dark Ages. And it makes you question the Dark Ages for who?
Yeah, right. Well, and that's interesting, like when you consider like the little season, is that what we're shown that was created in the Dark Ages, those ages seemed anything but dark. It seemed like the Light Ages, which they talk about afterwards was like the Age of Enlightenment. But when you consider that this devil, who many refer to as Lucifer, this light bearer, if he was stuck in a pit for 1,000 years, maybe it was dark for somebody. And the whole concept of the Dark Ages, that's another one where it's something that's like really glossed over, like in history class, like they might mention it in passing. But what I did learn when I was trying to research all kinds of other topics was when I was trying to get references to certain timelines of things, there's just not a lot of history at that time. And so this is what's really kind of ties a lot of it together, is because what people would say is, okay, so if Christ reigned for 1,000 years, well, we're 2,000 years after Christ. So that's a problem, because is the little season as long as the 1,000 years? Well, I don't think so, because what I found out through my research was we came across this guy named Gunnar Heinzen. He was a German sociologist and researcher. And this guy was not a Christian, so he was not trying to prove the little season. He's definitely not trying to prove people like me right. What he started to notice through stratigraphy, and so if you guys aren't familiar with that, it's like the idea that you have these strata layers of the Earth, and based on the construction of the buildings and where they lay at in the strata line, you can kind of determine what are the older buildings and what are the newer ones. Because, like you'd expect, like I said, like a city like Seattle. So there's older construction under the ground, and there's things built on top of them. So clearly the things under the ground are older than the things above. So what he was looking into was Rome. and he was looking at, I want to say he was looking into 30,000 different sites in Rome, and what he was shown was that you have like this certain construction style that was built in like early antiquity, like would have been 1st through 3rd century, and then mid antiquity obviously being 4th, 5th, and 6th century, and then you would have had like 8th, 7th, 8th, and 9th and 10th century. You have a different time, but what the history is telling us is that in these different periods, they started building things back like the 1st century, like what they call the Renaissance style. So they built the exact same architecture like the 1st century in mid-antiquity, and also they did it again in late antiquity. But what he started to see based on these buildings, they were all built at the exact same strata level. So they're saying like this building was built in the 1st century and this one was built in the 9th century, but yet they're the exact same looking buildings and they're at the exact same strata level. So what his conclusion was that there was probably 700 years added to the first 1,000 years of AD chronology, because it's like the architecture doesn't lie, but the chronology is what's incorrect. So based on this idea, it would have been more like Jesus would have been more like in the 8th century. So just think about like if you move him up in the timeline, let's just say instead of 1 AD he's born in like 700 AD, 701. So then this puts like the destruction of the temple in like 770. And so if you think 1,000 years after that is like 1776, where you have American Revolution that's followed by the French Revolution, and eventually a revolution in Russia, where you have these secular governments rebelling against Christian monarchies. And I thought that I was kind of blown away, because we were definitely thinking that with, again, what you said about the way that the buildings have, sometimes they have an I or a J, which it almost could be like if it's 1819, but the one is actually not a one, it's an I, or it's a J. And the I or the J could either stand for Jesus or Ezos, would have been like his Greek name. And so like you think about the Anno Domini chronology, it's like, it's this year of our Lord. So maybe that's where the timeline manipulation really took place, is that now this all these junk years were added. And that's why when you go back and you try to research these years, there's like shadows of history. There's not real substantial history that you can like, that's very highly chronicled. It's like you have like 1 or 2 lines and then just vagaries. And then you find out most of this history we're taught is very recent. Like that people like in the 18th and 19th century wrote about things that were 1,000 years before them, but you don't have real good chronicles of those years in, manuscripts about those years.
Absolutely. And man, so much there to dig into, but you mentioned Lucifer and the light bearer and this stuff. This is something I really want to talk about because I find this fascinating. I know you've done videos on this. Is the Statue of Liberty is a bit suspicious looking. What should people be looking at when they see this statue that has a very similar resemblance to this other character we've seen before? It has the same hat, the same light being held up. It has a chain broken on its foot. It's holding the book. What's really going on there with the Statue of Liberty? What should people be looking for?
Well, I remember when I first started looking into like the symbolism with the Statue of Liberty, I made a video about 9/11 at one point, and I was just looking at it, and the Statue of Liberty definitely has a kind of an androgynous look. It's definitely it's a woman, but it's kind of got maybe a masculine face. And if you look at some old statues, that there was this very famous old statue in Greece. It was called the Colossus of Rhodes, and it was this giant statue to Helios, the sun god. Helios was eventually basically replaced by Apollo as being their sun god, like in later mythologies. I want to say in like the Sumerian tradition, you had this god named Shamash. And Shamash has, again, if you see like old pictures or like old depictions of Shamash, he's got like, he had the light crown. And it's like all the sun gods all resemble the other ones. So when you start to think about that, the Statue of Liberty has this plaque on there that says light illuminating the world. Apollo and the similarities between, the biblical character of like Lucifer it's almost identical. It's like what he's being described as. So yeah, we started to wonder if the little season could have started right around the time of the American Revolution. Well, what if this is a symbol that he's out? That's him being loosed out of the pit. And so this illumination that's going around the world, which a lot of people say, oh, well, what's wrong with light and what's wrong with knowledge? What's wrong with all these things? Well, I mean, false light's bad. And like the knowledge that the serpent gave to Adam and Eve was actually not a good thing. Like him getting them to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and of dooming humanity. So maybe that's how it can be bad. So yeah, I think that these people love their symbols. That is their language. Like I want to say Manly P. Hall famously said that symbols are the language of the mysteries. So that's why, again, these people, they might say one thing with their mouth, but through signs and symbols, like how they cover up one eye or they do like this and whatever they might do, or like cover their hand up.
Put 33 and all these numbers everywhere, 666.
Right. That is when they're actually telling you who they are. They can lie to you with their lips, but they can tell you who they are through their symbols. Because what he was saying was that these symbols, these esoteric ideas, they go past the idea of language and time. So these things have always meant a certain thing. And I think certainly these symbols probably have been corrupted. But at the same time, like that, if you do look into like Freemasonry and all the esoteric beliefs they have, this is what it's about. It's about connection to this hidden knowledge of things. And what if some of the hidden knowledge is the fact that we're not on the right timeline?
And what makes this such a fascinating game to play is that all of these ancient sides, the good guys and the bad guys, are all using symbolism in different ways. And so it's really just a big puzzle of trying to figure out who means what, where, who are the good guys and bad guys even, where things moved around, who manipulated what, like you said. And one of the things I forgot to mention earlier, you're talking about this whole 700 years being added and just the manipulation of the timeline. And from a number standpoint, Jason Jack's series was what, to me, just like seems very convincing that this is what happened. I think that the final number was around 700 years was added. Is that the conclusion that you came up with?
Well, this is what Gunnar Heinzen said, and that's compelling. I mean, other people have said 1,000 years. I have no beef with either one of them. Gunnar's work was really good because it was he's like a German guy, so it was very well explained. It was like he had a very analytical way of how he laid it out. So without any kind of better proof, I'm just going with the 700 years. Makes sense. Which again would kind of put us in, if we're in the little season, we could be approaching the 250 year mark. Could be the end of it.
And this is what I think would be a perfect way to start bringing this from home. It's crazy. We've been talking for over an hour and a half. It flew by. But when people ask, okay, this sounds crazy, but what does it mean for here right now? Like, where are we in all this crazy madness? And to me, one of the most mind-blowing things is that there's a few logical assumptions we can make. So if we're going off of this belief that, okay, so the millennial reign of Christ already happened, that's the explanation for all these buildings everywhere that are so confusing. That seems to make sense. And if that makes sense, then if we're thinking what a season would be, it could be a quarter of that millennial reign. So it could be 250 years. And when you look at that book that the Statue of Liberty is holding, and we know when America was founded, July 4th, 1776. And when we add 250 years to 1776, it's July 4th, 2026. It's this year, July 4th. I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think about this? Like, wait a minute, is this the year that we get some answers?
I've heard. I mean, a lot of my friends kind of go by that. I don't think anybody is really still pointing to that as saying like that they believe it's the end. It is interesting. Again, the idea of when Satan was actually let out versus when he was let out. It's really hard to say. Like, I was kind of. It's funny because I'm a little bit of a Tolkien nerd. And I like movies a lot, so I like to compare a lot of things to movies. And so if you think about like a movie like The Lord of the Rings, when it talks about like Sauron's back, but like but people really don't know. And like, it's almost like he's back, but he's not able to take physical form. And there's like this kind of shadow, and there's like kind of rumors, and there's all these things. And if you think about like a Harry Potter,
I was just going to say that the Voldemort thing is kind of similar. Yeah.
there's rumors that he's back, and like people are not even sure if it's true or not. But it's kind of like the henchman of the evil one is kind of prepping the way for when he does return. So put it this way, like he could have been like ready to come back. Maybe this is a sign that he was going to. I want to say that the Statue of Liberty was, I think it was like 1850 or 1860. It was put in New York City. So I guess point being is it could be getting close to the end. It does seem like the way that the elites have kind of moved things along, especially through the pandemic and all the changes that have been made since then. It seems like things have accelerated to some kind of a head. So there's something about that. And of course, as again, I was waking up in 2020, I was thinking this is the end times. So I don't think that I was wrong to think like something's changed. Like there's been a shift, very obviously. I mean, it's, remember like the new normal, like things aren't ever going back to the way they were. So it seems like things have accelerated. Even that idea that like people like Crowley talked about the new age. You know, they were talking about the age of Aquarius coming, and like when this shift happens, this is going to be the age of Horus. We're going to move out of the age of Pisces, which Pisces, you think about even like the fish being the sign of like almost like the Jesus fish. And then we get into this new age that's going to be ruled by Horus, which again, Horus, Apollo, they're actually very similar in a lot of the ways. Like different religions will kind of view them similar characters. It seems like something's happening. Now I don't know, like I don't like to put dates on it because the Bible tells us there's this 1,000 years, and it says it more than one time. So like there's like a specific amount of time. Even people debate whether that's an actual 1,000 years or if it's an indefinite amount of like a long time. But the little season, it never says how long it is. So I always kind of concluded that it's as long as it needs to be. It's as long as it takes for the devil to deceive the nations to gather this army together to do something to make war with the camp of the saints. Now that's when it gets into the more like kind of weird is where is the camp of the saints at? You know, I believe that Jesus spoke of his kingdom as not being of this world. He talks about a heavenly place. And so there are these mythologies about like these floating cities. Is that city like literally like a metaphysical place that could be somewhere where like the North Star is? Maybe up in the north. It could be up where like you think about like those old maps that show the 4 intersecting rivers around the Rupus Nigra where the North Pole was, that are obviously it's not shown like that anymore. Maybe that's the stuff like the push for like this stuff in the Arctic, the stuff for like Trump trying to get Greenland, all the things that we don't have access to. Even like you said, the Antarctica may be the psyop to point away from the things that are up north that we don't know. Like that they want us to be fighting about the things that are happening in the Antarctic and not the Arctic.
That's such a good point. And when I really stop and think about that, I fully agree. I'm super fascinated with Antarctica. I think there's tons of secrets there. And as a flat earther, I think there's more land beyond it for sure. But I think before we even go there, we should understand our own world and what's here and what lies are being hidden from us. Because you can look at these old maps from hundreds of years ago that are extremely accurate for all the things that we can confirm with our own eyes. They have lots of interesting stuff on them. First of all, they have cities all over the place where there aren't cities anymore. They have these different animals that we're told are mythical, like dragons and centaurs,
sea
and
monsters, krakens, and stuff.
Yeah, and we're told this stuff is all mythology and it's made up stories. But who knows? I mean, there's a lot of lies out there. It's possible they could be real. And in the North Pole, they have a very different picture than what we have now. You're talking about how when you go on Google Earth and you get this weird computer animation everywhere, when you look up north beyond the Greenland and all these places, it's just there's nothing. There's nothing there. They're just saying that there's nothing there. And I think this is part of the reason why the whole Santa Claus thing is pushed on kids so much, because as soon as we realize Santa Claus isn't real, we just forget about the North Pole. Like it kind of goes away with that. And we just never think about it again. But I think I'm with you. I think there's some major answers to a lot of different questions in the North Pole, one of which being so I'll just throw out some personal theories. I think that there's definitely a Rupus nigra black rock there that's creating that huge magnetic pull for all the compasses. I think that the creation of the tides is up there. There's some sort of vortex mechanism that's creating the tides in the North Pole, right in the center. And like you said, I mean, this biblical stuff, the Northern Lights are interesting. They come out of the North Pole. I don't know if you've even heard of a lot of people claiming they hear this weird horn sound sometimes. Only certain people can hear this.
I haven't heard that, but I mean, I do know that the Northern Lights, the colors described in the Book of Revelation, it talks about coming out of God's throne.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Are basically identical.
What's this?
They're basically identical to the Northern Lights. Wow. The color.
I think I did see a video.
I mean, even think about
actually.
again, back to movies. You think about the Wizard of Oz, this place beyond the rainbow that you have this Emerald City. It's, I think that they're kind of intimating that this is a heavenly place. This is not like on Earth. And it is kind of like it's like here, but it's not like here.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way I kind of describe it, because I still do believe that despite thinking the millennial reign has taken place, I think that there was a lot of supernatural things that took place, but I don't think that Jesus was physically down the street doing his thing. I think he was always ruling from a more like a metaphysical place, because when Christ is resurrected in the Gospels, he can eat, he can be touched, but he can also get into rooms without using the doors.
Oh, does it say that?
So there's something different going on. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. It just talks about how he just kind of appears and he's gone. So it's like his body is different than ours. It's same, but it's different. So I thought about, so what if the heavenly city is something like that? And there are these mythologies about paradise. My buddy Affeltalks actually did a great book about this. All the mythologies all around the world about Hyperborea and different places where there's these island cities that can be seen sometimes and sometimes they're gone. And you see these old depictions, even on old coins, of a heavenly looking city. So I started to wonder if the idea that the New Jerusalem is a heavenly city, but the camp of the saints could be below it. Maybe it is the idea that maybe New Jerusalem is above this Rupus nigra. And so, I'm really fascinated with the idea that there was a great documentary a few years ago called The Lost History of Flat Earth.
And
it was kind of, and it was kind of posing the idea that what we live in is a giant toroidal field. But this city could have something to do with it. And they even talk about magnetic north shifting. And I think a lot of that it could be this idea that this city is actually what's causing the way that this circuit kind of works and things like that. This could be behind some of this stuff. I mean, obviously that's a far out there theory, but you do kind of wonder too, if the alien psyop is this idea that, is this how the devil would trick people into fighting against God? Is that if one day this city could be seen, and maybe you're only seeing the bottom of it. So what if this would look like some gigantic mothership? It could be like Thanos coming, and this is how you get all the people to go fight against God, because they don't know it's God.
Yeah. So that brings up the question I was going to ask you next, which is, obviously, as you're saying, there's lots of questions here, a lot of symbolism being used. There isn't a cut and dry story of exactly what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. But what is your personal theory? We'll forget about the timeline for now. When we reach this final battle, the prophesied battle of the Gog and Magog, where Satan brings all the nations together to fight against God, or the New Jerusalem, right? Camp of the Saints. Mm-hmm. And so all that I know basically is that, as you said, this New Jerusalem comes down from the heavens. How big is it? Will we be able to see it from everywhere, or just will it be in the North Pole? Or walk me through what your prediction is for how we figure out what's actually going to happen here. Or I know it's really out there, but
I want to say the biblical description of New Jerusalem is described as having the same width, the same length, and the same height. They're all the exact same dimensions. So some people have concluded that it's a giant cube. But the other thing that it could look like would be a pyramid, because you could still have the same amount of sides and the height being the same thing. But yeah, actually, the way the Bible describes it, it's like thousands of miles. It's that big. So it's absolutely massive. So it could be something that, yeah, it would be, maybe it's akin to all this other deception from NASA, is the idea that there's this asteroid coming, there's this planetary alignment, maybe Nibiru's coming into view, like it's planet X, like all these kind of different weird ideas that something is a threat that's coming. And that's what it could appear to be, is like if this was ever shown to, if it ever became visible to us, it would just be like this massive thing that would blot out the sun. And like we really wouldn't know what it was. So yeah, I mean, I know that's like, it's so hard to imagine that being like a real thing that could ever happen, but you do kind of wonder, like, why did they always show us that stuff in the movies about this threat? Like, yeah, Thanos coming. Thanos is coming to judge and to wipe out a large portion of humanity, start over, and all that stuff.
Independence Day is another one, like this huge alien spaceship coming down, and we have to go defeat it.
Independence Day, where these ships, when they first show up, they're just gigantic clouds. And you think about, like, in the Bible, God kind of is in a cloud in Mount Sinai. He moves over the camp of the Israelites in a cloud. So eventually it's revealed that these clouds actually are hiding these gigantic spaceships that are the size of cities. And then eventually, they all have this countdown to when they start to annihilate these cities. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it does seem like that deception is there for a reason. And again, that's you go back to like the very famous Ronald Reagan speech in front of the UN, where he said, like, how the nations would put away their petty differences if there was some kind of alien threat, there was an existential threat to humanity, that they would bound together and they would fight against something for a common goal. I mean, that's the only way you could really actually see that the nations would actually agree about anything. But at the same time, there is this push for this new world order, but maybe the new world order already happened. This Norvis Ordo Seclorum is like that we have a hidden hand that actually is this order, and we have the illusion of sovereign nations, but it hasn't been like that pretty much for 250 years at least.
Right. So what does a guy like me and a guy like you do about this? How can we prepare to, if this is happening? Obviously there's a lot of big ideas that to a lot of listeners will think sounds crazy woo-woo, but for those that think, you know what, these dots are kind of lining up, I want to be safe and I don't want to take any chances, what should we be doing to prepare for this potential madness literally coming down from the sky?
Well, I mean, if you believe anything I'm saying, if you think there's any validity to it, then it's all centers around Jesus Christ. I mean, so like if you read the Gospels and you actually believe in him, well, then you know that the victory is guaranteed. Like, there's no really getting out of this place alive, regardless of what we're planning on doing. Like, I'm not one of these people who believe like a rapture is coming soon, but if you believe that this is true, if you believe that we're in the little season, then you believe Jesus is real. So I would encourage people to seek him, and I'd put your faith in him, because the truth is so much of this is speculation, and we can't really know what's going to happen next. But that obviously does encourage me, because when you kind of look into like the other alternative views about this, about, a number of resets, that it's all the controllers are in control and they do this whenever they feel like it. Well, that's a pretty black pilled kind of view, that it's like that there's really nothing you can do if you think about it like that. Now, I think my view's more hopeful. I mean, yes, it could get bad, and it does seem like it's already getting, it's worse. It's worse now than when I was growing up. So like the way that the governments of the world have been oppressing the people here. The idea of tyranny coming I believe it's here. We got like a soft tyranny, but it's growing. So with that being said, yeah, I would encourage people to see God. I mean, I don't know that there's any other really way to get around it, because if these prophecies are real and it is going to happen, well, there's really nothing you can do to stop it. I mean, I think that from my perspective, if I believe we're in the little season, part of the whole goal of the little season, at least from the devil's perspective, is to deceive people. So if I can help wake people up and I can help share the truth with them and show them love and obviously share them the gospel, well, then maybe we can delay some of this stuff. If we're not deceived, it's like, can this battle happen? I mean, it will happen, but I mean, God doesn't say exactly how long it needs to be. So I encourage people just to continue to go research and continue to wake people up. I mean, I feel like that the analogy that we're in a matrix, I mean, I think it's totally valid, because so many people are just going about their day and just trying to act like nothing's wrong. But we know that we live in a lie. So if you can continue to wake people up and ask them questions about, you really believe these people are telling you the truth? And if they say yes, well, then there's not a lot you can do with that. But if they say, yeah, I think you're right about that, I think they are lying, then you have to kind of point them to like what you believe to be true.
Yeah, and that's why for me personally, I just try to really focus on the big lies that I can confirm with my own senses and research are truly lies that really break a huge dent into the armor of this whole deceptive veil, which is why, despite all of the trash talking and the name calling that flat earthers receive, I think there's no bigger lie than that. Once people figure out they were lied to about the globe, then all of a sudden you completely start from scratch on everything, and you're a lot more absorbent to new and out there ideas, which is like myself included. I've gone through this journey myself, and as I told you, going through that whole rabbit hole and making the video series about it on my podcast just completely wiped out all the final obstacles I had to questioning everything and truly questioning everything. And I think that's where we want to get as many people as we can there to start from scratch, because I think that's better than trying to just pick at little things and say, this is a lie here, this is a lie here. Let's just wipe the slate clean. It's all lies. Everything, every freaking thing we were taught growing up was a lie. And a lot of people will say, oh, that's so like depressing to feel that way. And oh, like you're just skeptical for the sake of being skeptical. But I feel so much more empowered and positive about the future when we actually are starting from a first principles foundation and looking at things from zero. I think it's a better place to start. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Like I said, some of the things that I've learned have not been very pleasant at the beginning. Like a lot of things. I want to say that, Owen Benjamin, he had a really funny video when he had like his 6 or 7 minute video about him, like all his stages of grief as he woke up to flat Earth. I think that's how it is for a lot of us, and in a lot of conspiracy, especially like the little season. That it's not something I necessarily wanted to believe, but like if you do accept it at one point, you guys say, okay, take a deep breath. Like, okay, what's next? And yeah, and a lot of this stuff has been refreshing, because I don't know. I think that maybe because we are made in the image of a creator, we want truth. We want things to make sense. So a lie that's comforting is still like, there's still something about it that you're like, I don't know. Like you can't really kind of rest with that. But like this truth might be painful, but if I accept it, I'm like, okay, so where do I go from here? And eventually you're like, okay, I'm still making it through the day. So each day gets a little bit easier. And then the more I've kind of gone down this journey, yeah, I like that there's a lot of mystery here. I like that things are not all figured out, because we're curious. And I think it does kind of take us back to that kind of childlike mindset of there's a lot of wonder still left in the world. History is way more interesting when you're actually looking into true history, not regurgitating facts that are not facts and dates and names that don't matter, but like looking into like the whys, what's important about this. So yeah, again, it's like the Matrix, where when Neo first wakes up, obviously he wants to go back and he throws up, and that was all of us. But then you really think about it, like, do you really want to be inserted back in the Matrix to eat the fake steak? No, like you can't go back to sleep. You have to continue on this journey. And again, I think that when you think about like the whole idea that if all this stuff is true, a lot of the stuff most flat earthers will acknowledge that this is to hide God. So if you believe God's real, I can show you that the elites believe the devil's real. So therefore Jesus is real. The story is written, like the victory is guaranteed through him. So I would just encourage people just to kind of just think about that the light overcomes the darkness at the end of this, to be on the light side.
100%. And what you said there, which I think would be a great place to wrap this up, is how you talked about there's still a lot of wonder out there. And I would take that even a step further and say there's more wonder out there than there ever has been, because we can see the remnants and clues of all of these crazy things we're starting to wake up to has happened in our history that was completely wiped out. This is the greatest game ever. I loved games growing up. I always played these mystery games and Clue and video games and stuff like that. the world's full of gamers right now. We have the game of trying to figure out this mystery of what happened in this place, and that will help us figure out what's happening in the future. And it's just so much fun with the right mindset. And like you said, it's not a pleasant or peaceful journey to realize that everything we were told is a lie. And there's going to be a lot of phases of learning about this where you're just questioning everything and just confused. And it's like that meme in the bus where you have the guy looking at the darkness versus the light. It's up to you if you take this with a really optimistic, fun-loving attitude, or if you just let it beat you down. And I think that there's a reason why all the people that are in this community of diving through these rabbit holes are all just awesome, happy, fun-loving people, because that's the type of person that's able to stick this out and really lock in and get the most out of it and provide the most value to the people. So it's a huge pleasure to be in this crazy game with you, sir, and be diving through all these rabbit holes and learning more every day from your content. Where would you send people who want to go learn more about all these different things we've been talking about today?
Yeah, well, if you'd like to hear any more about this stuff, like I said, I talk about this all the time. I've got hundreds of hours of my podcast over on JT's Follows JC. You can find that on YouTube. If you'd like to listen to podcasts, you can look up JT's Mixtape on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you can listen to podcasts. Or if you like the short stuff and like to share some of that stuff, follow me on X, because again, I'm trying to build on X, but you can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, and pretty much everywhere where you can find social media stuff. Like you can look up JT Follows JC, you can find me.
Amazing, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you so much for doing this, and we'll be in touch on all the socials, and we got to do another one in the future.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't even touch my notes on this whole thing. So we will have a lot more to cover in the future, my friend. It's been great chatting.
Yeah, likewise.
Everyone left me. Everyone deserted me. Jesus was always there. When everyone hated me and walked away, Jesus never walked away.